up exceeding the usefulness of this area, but all the other tunnels I've dug down here, at this point, digging two tunnels like this, I'd have at least 10 or 15 debris, and I've gotten squat right now. And then another thing, I wished I'd have felt better so I could have done this a couple weeks because all that stuff would have been fresh in my head. And I found this really fascinating. Oh, the other thing was, uh, there is apparently a modern day UFO sighting, and it's called the Tic Tac. And what it was, military people have actually been allowed to come forward and talk about this. This might have been one of the things that was leaked on CNN a couple years ago. But according to the guy, I think he's a full commander in the Navy. I don't think he's Air Force. I think he was Navy. I believe he was out on a carrier, but I might be wrong on it. Take it with a grain of salt. What they did was they saw this object and they call it a tic tac because even though it was large, it kind of was shaped like a tic tac. It was a cylindrical object, or like a tic tac, like a capsule, like a medicine capsule. And what happened was this thing was up around 40, 50,000 feet. And when he was being asked about it, they said, well, we understand it dropped altitude real fast. He goes, yeah, that's not exactly what it did. And they're like, what do you mean? He goes, this thing was like 50, 60,000 feet or miles, whatever. It was way up there. This thing was up there and it dropped to like 10 feet off the water in like a couple seconds. They go, we do not have anything that'll do that. And then after it hovered there for a little bit and it just stopped dead, he goes, we don't have things that'll do that. And afterwards, it just took off and it went way back up in a blink of an eye, just in a couple seconds. And they said, we just don't have things that'll do this. End of that tunnel. And then the other things that I'll talk about, if you have, I can't remember if it's on the Sci-Fi app or if it's on the Peacock app, and I've been basically watching the reruns of it. If I don't know if the show is still on or not, but on the History Channel they had a thing called Project Blue Book. It was a TV show. Now, what I'm about to tell you to introduce this is actually factual. You can look some of this up. Uh, Project Blue Book is the name of the show, and um, there was an actual government program. The military ran it. It was called Project Blue Book, and this is absolutely true. What I'm about to tell you, Project Blue Book, and I can't remember the name of the project, but the one that Harry Reid started that I was talking about, it would have been like a modern day Project Blue. But originally, uh, you had the Roswell crash, and if you want to get into, I got to dig another tunnel. If you want to get into that, the Roswell crash, there was allegedly a UFO that crashed in Roswell, New Mexico, or approximately in Roswell. There were, and allegedly there were two crash sites. One of them was on, I think, the Brazil Ranch, and what happened was the military came in and the people that were sent there were actually part of, it was the only military bombing unit that was authorized to use nuclear ordnance. This was the nuclear bombing site. uh, we only had one. If nukes were going to be dropped at that time, it would have been this base that would have been called up. So these guys were, I, I think you would have to admit that if it was our secret weapon, the people that were there would probably be considered the tip of the spears. and they were sent to investigate it. And after the military was there, now these guys should have had access to pretty much all of the top secret stuff, all the advanced stuff there, because they were the bombing unit that actually had access to the nuclear weapons. They basically said, yeah, this is something that isn't from Earth. This is beyond us. And there's a lot of stories that go with it. Well, here's the thing, and these are factual things that I'm saying. This is what happened. It was new. It was like headline news across the country. U.S. Army says UFO or aliens were found at Roswell, New Mexico. And actually, you had Project Blue Book, but the first investigation that the military did into aliens was called Project Sign. That was the first military investigation into UFOs. And they came back and said, yeah, there's things that are here that are not from this planet. This is a factual thing you can look up. There's things that we've investigated that we can't explain them by earthly means. They clearly did not originate from any intelligence on this planet that we're aware of. And so everybody was fired. And then the next project was called Project Grudge. And, they fired everybody. They called it Project Grudge. They were kind of sending a message that this is not an acceptable answer. Regardless of what the answer is, this one isn't acceptable. And I'll give you an example, okay? You had, when Bush 43 was present, that would be Junior. This is something not everybody knows. Another factual thing. 6 nuclear missiles came up missing. And I think my personal opinion, there was more to this because I had a friend and he's a lot smarter than I. He really is. And we were talking about the war at the time, and he was asking me because I think he knows I follow this shit a little bit than he does. He's way smarter than me, every measurable way, with the exception of maybe sci-fi trivia questions and 80s music. I think that's the only thing I'm actually smarter than him brain wise, but he knows I follow this. We got talking about the mess in the Middle East, and he goes, we were talking about it, and I go, they got us into Iraq and it turned into a mess. And I go, now they're fucking around with Iran. He goes, yeah, that's what I want to know about. And I go, Iran has got something like 3 times the population and 5 times the territory. I go, I honestly think they're getting us, those that want to get us into war with Iraq basically want to start a war where we're fighting Iraq and Iran at the same time, and they'll have an excuse to nuke one of the countries. And he goes, well, how? He goes, you don't really think they'd nuke it? I don't think they'd nuke it openly. And he goes, what do you mean? I go, this is a story that isn't real big yet, but I go, they had 6 missiles that went missing. As far as it was on paper, they were nuclear ordnance that was supposed to be scrapped. And on paper, they were scrapped. But in reality, they had been loaded on a plane. So they would have been basically, if there was a pilot who did his due diligence and he figured out these 6 nukes were on the plane and they weren't supposed to be on there, and he raised hell about it. And I honestly think the plan was, well, once we get these nukes where they're officially destroyed, but we have them, they could have turned them into a suitcase bomb, God knows what, and they could have, nuked a couple of these countries and blamed it on them or Pakistan or whoever the fuck. That's my opinion. And he just looked at me and he goes, you're serious? I go, yeah, go ahead and look it up. And they did. Well, what happened was Secretary of Defense Gates, he became the Secretary of Defense. Well, what happened was he had a panel of generals. They were supposed to get. They were basically supposed to get the bottom of how these nukes ended up on that plane when they were supposed to be scrapped and decommissioned. And they basically came back and said, "Yeah, we don't know." He fired every one of them. This is not a little thing, to fire a general like that. But he shit canned every one of them and put a new bunch of generals in charge of it, and basically letting them know this is unacceptable. Six nuclear missiles were basically going to be unaccounted for. Okay, now that's a good question. Now just I gotta stop what I'm doing for a minute. I gotta think about this one. Um, a lot of it would depend on who the country is, but it would. I'm not going to say I would. I'm not going to say I wouldn't because it would have to. It would have to depend on a couple things. We've actually got military units that I think they call them missile X drills. They actually train to shoot these things down. And I got a feeling, if I was president, it's a big if, okay? I'm not nearly smart enough or emotionally stable enough for that, even when I was healthy. But in a case like that, if I was president, the Secretary of Defense would have standing orders. They'd be written down, they'd be on paper, that this was not a thing that he would even have to ask, or he could immediately scramble the Missile X teams to try and shoot these fuckers down. And if it was something where it was actually an attack, yes, I would counterattack. If we were reasonably sure it was an actual attack, yes, I would blow them off the face of the earth. Absolutely. But if it was like a rogue action, there's been TV shows and movies, and they talked about this, where I think Hunt for Red October was one of them, where you had some rogue Russian that was gonna, basically stealing some nukes, getting the code so he could launch them. If it was something like that, where it was a rogue actor, and you were reasonably sure you could minimize the damage, I don't know. If it's just like one guy firing one missile and you could reasonably be sure that we weren't going to get wiped out, no, I wouldn't counterattack. But if it was a fall out assault, yeah, definitely I would counterattack, me personally. Because yeah, we're going to get wiped out, but I don't think they should profit from that. Yeah, because you think about it, like you got Putin over there. If Putin nuked us, you'd have to nuke Russia just to make sure that the rest of the country didn't have to die under his boot. Because without us in the world, for all our flaws, without us in the world, there are far worse people that would be in charge. And we are not perfect. We should try to do better. We should make amends for what we've done and make sure we don't do it. But let's be honest, man, if Hitler or Stalin or, a whole host of people, Pol Pot, if they were in charge, you know, the world would be better off. And here's the thing: when you're talking about that, this is one of the things that's always been. I've done scenarios like this because I've had some pretty extensive training. I'm not military, never been military, but some of the people that I've trained with, they've actually created programs for the military. And sweet, I don't even know. Oh, good, we got people on. Um, but like, because there's one of my instructors. This is a guy, and he talked about this a couple different times. Uh, he teaches a lot of unarmed stuff. He actually has created a program for a local police to train new cops, and he was doing a knife thing. And he said, he goes, yeah, I got this thing where I ask my new students questions, and one of the ones he does is when he's got people joining his knife classes, is he asks them this question like, when would you when would you pull out your knife and use it? Okay. And he said, it was like an educational thing because it kind of let him know if like if it was kind of a thing to try and catch psychos or people that were a little misinformed. And he was telling us about the questions. He goes, "Man, you should see the questions I get on this, right?" And then he talks to him. He gets all the questions, he reads them over, and then he goes over them. And he said, he goes, "I've seen everything. I've absolutely seen everything. You got these people that are just trying to, like what you did, this little question you did, and I'm not ripping on it at all, but it's real similar to." He goes, "They're just trying to rationalize it. They'd be like, well, if somebody was trying to hurt my mom, or if somebody was trying to rape my girlfriend, or somebody trying to steal this or that." And then what he would do is he would explain to them that the time you should pull a knife is when you intend to take a life. And that was the thing. He's like, so these people were always trying to rationalize with what threshold or whatever would set it off that you would pull the knife and use it. And he basically let them know, he goes, well, regardless of that, he goes, the only time you should pull a knife is when you intend to kill someone. That's when you should pull a knife. If you don't intend to kill somebody, you shouldn't pull that knife out. You shouldn't pull it out to intimidate. You shouldn't pull it out to threaten. You should pull it out when you intend to use it. And when you intend to use it, someone's likely going to die, you or someone else. And another thing that has come up in these discussions from my personal experiences that, and I've seen something similar in either a book or a movie. Because when I heard this, I'm like, and that's probably where they got it from, to be completely honest. But when you use a weapon, it's not as important to look at what you're killing, but to look at what you are allowing to live. That that's the more important thing. And that's why I said, for me, it's just not a clear cut thing where, yeah, I'd nuke them. Hell yeah. If it was just a lone wolf and you had one missile incoming, or if, let's say it was a country like North Korea where, yeah, he might launch 10 missiles, but only one of them is going to reach here. In a case like that, I don't know. I think I would still nuke North Korea. Um, but maybe not. If it was just going to be one missile and you weren't, you were pretty sure you were going to survive it with damage. Um, yeah, I haven't been in a lot of fights either. If I do it more because I like the art. That's why I did it. But some of the people I trained under actually either were in stuff or they trained by people that, like, one of the instructors I had. He passed away. Uh, he died like the day before my birthday, like about, I think it was in '08 or '09 or something. He died like literally the day before my birthday, and that guy volunteered for 2 tours in Vietnam. He was a law enforcement. He was like a deputy sheriff down south, and he was actually Mr. T's bodyguard for a little bit. Not making that up. I'm literally not. And he was a student of Bruce Lee's, but I'm literally not making that up. He was Mr. T's bodyguard at one point. Um, but you learn things from these guys. Uh, I can't remember which one. It was one of these old military guys that I trained under. They got talking about medals and medals and shit that people get for being in the service. And the opinion of this guy was that the medals are basically there for the people who never went to combat, or the people back home, the ones that either never went to combat while they were in active service, or for the people back home to make them feel good, kind of like a John Wayne movie. If you go back and watch, I'll get to your question in a second. I'm on a roll here. But if you go back and look at a lot of John Wayne's war movies, they were basically war porn. They really were. They made it look good. They made it flashy. Not all of them. And I like all his movies. Almost them, the really good ones I like. But because this guy, he'd actually served, and he basically said that there's only two types of people in a combat zone. He goes, there's victims and survivors. That was his honest opinion of it. That I'd kill everybody on the planet at that point. Hang on one sec. Oh, hey, Pixel. Yeah, I've got I've got one Trident killer that's still working. 3 of my Trident killers broke. The Trident killer for my raid farm broke. The Trident killer for my zombie farm broke, and the Trident killer to give me the bad omen. The Trident killer in my outpost broke. The Trident killer in my skeleton farm still works. So if you're using a Trident killer, yeah, it probably killed your gold farm. And I have not figured out a way to fix it because I broke the Trident killer down and I rebuilt it block by block, and it still doesn't want to work. What I'm seeing is the observer doesn't want to read the state of change in the hopper. I even did one where I put the hopper pointing up, or the hopper pointing up. I put a oh, oh, okay, that I can't help you on. But no, the yeah, I'd launch if it was basically a dedicated attack to wipe us out. Yeah, but the thing is, if every country in the world, and this should make it a little easier to justify the decision, if every country in the world is launching nukes at us, the nuclear fallout's going to probably kill the planet anyways. But I honestly, if it was my call, and this is the thing, I can say it theoretically now. Who knows how you'd be? I might be under the desk, curled up in a ball, sucking my thumb too. But as an intellectual exercise, yeah, I'd fire back at them. Absolutely, without a doubt. I actually don't mind the question. I'm gonna try and get. I gotta remember. Gotta remember where I left off. Well, anyways, with Roswell, um, they yeah, Roswell, Project Sign, Project Grudge. I can't remember off the top of my head what happened. I think at the end of Project Grudge, it was the same thing. They're like, yeah, there's things going on that we can't explain. So those guys got fired. And then it became Project Blue Book. And the TV show, I think, does a reasonable job covering the subject. Okay. And now those are the facts of it. Here's another fact on it. When they got done with Project Blue Book, I believe it's Project Blue Book special report number 13 or 17. These were things that were not originally released, but they have been declassified now. Um, that was the side report that they did. It was not included in the main report. It was not, it might never have been classified, but they definitely didn't advertise it. It came out years later. But in the special report 17 or 13 that it is, that was all the stuff they couldn't explain. There was even with the whitewashing they did on Blue Brook, there was things that they could not explain, and that made it into the special report. And then the other thing I would add to it is there is a guy, Nick Pope is his name. He worked for the British. It's basically the British version of the Department of Defense. It'd be like the Ministry of Defense or something like that. Nick Pope worked for it, and kind of like that guy I was talking about, where he was kind of in charge of the special. Um, Hang on, I'm gonna turn that down so it isn't fucking up the stream. But he worked for the British equivalent of the Ministry of Defense. And whatever his job was, all the unexplained aerial phenomena, I think that's the new UAP. Instead of UFO, they're calling it UAP now. But all the UAP came across his desk. All the UFO information came across his desk. And it freaked him out. It absolutely freaked him out. And he actually thought that it shouldn't be getting swept under the rug like it did. So he started making waves. And this guy has done books. He does UFO panels and stuff like that. Well, here's the thing. This guy started talking out of school about UFOs. Now, if he was a nut job, if he was just completely off his rocker, you think they'd shit can him for cause. But my understanding back at the time, this is one of these things where I'm not saying it proves anything, but I would say it's at least circumstantially supportive to the notion. What they did was they gave him a lateral move. They moved him to another department where he wouldn't be anywhere near the UFOs. But he basically had the same position. You know, they didn't demote him. None of this bullshit. And that was one of those things that over the years has really made a lot of sense to me. It's like, yeah, there might be something to this. But anyways, with Project Blue Book, I have heard this said that if you go back, and these are by scientists, these are people that would know. If you go back and look, there was a guy, he was part of Project Blue Book, and his name was Dr. Hynek. And he basically came up with a lot of the explanations for what people saw: swamp gas, ball lightning. And when you listen to people, and these guys could be off their meds, I don't know. When you listen to these people, they say that he gave explanations for shit that would not have passed a first year physics exam. Like if you gave that answer on your test, first year physics student, you'd get an F. You know, you'd get marked wrong for that. And after the project was over, he has pretty much reversed himself and basically, I don't know if he's completely, might not be able to because of some, he might have signed security clearance stuff and shit like that where he could be prosecuted, but he's really taken a different tack now that he's no longer working for the government. And the other one that I would throw out there, and this is another fact, you can look it up. Back when the Roswell crash happened, there is actually an FBI memo, and I want to say you can look this up by looking up the FBI Guy Hotel memo, HOTTEL or something like that. This is a guy that wrote a memo to Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, who I believe was in charge of it then. And there's actually, I think it's up on the FBI website, but he basically wrote a memo. FBI agent Guy Hotel, HOTTEL, I think is how you spell it. And he wrote this memo to the director of the FBI, basically telling him that there appears to be two crash sites. They recovered a craft, they recovered bodies, and he's letting him know that he hasn't been allowed access to it. And that's a factual thing. Whether it's bullshit or not, that I can't tell you, but it is an actual FBI memo that the FBI is not trying to cover up. The other thing that has come out, and again, take it with a grain of salt, but the God, he would have been the intelligence officer for I don't know if it was called Roswell Airfield, but it was basically the military base that was sent to investigate the UFO. Oh, I found my first debris. Okay, we got our first debris. That's good. Yep, yep, yep. Love it. Um, what happened was is the general from the base is the one that sent. Trying to think of the name of the guy that actually went there, the officer. Can't think of his name, but he went there and he reported back, and his general is the one that released the information to the news that yes, we found aliens. Yeah, we did. Yep, yep, yep. And a new general got sent in, and he's the one that made the intelligence officer. He's the guy that posed with the weather balloon shit. The guy that was just basically he had a look on his face like you got to be fucking kidding me. So that this is the guy that reported, yeah, it's an alien. So they made him sit there with like balsa wood and tinfoil, and they made him the patsy for that thing. Well, somebody went and used a computer years later to go in and look at the memo that the general was holding. There's part of the page, and according to him, when they computer enhanced it, basically that memo, at least in part, talks about a cover up. They basically, it was his job to go there. He was basically given direct orders to go there and cover this up. That's what that's been out for a while, and I don't know if anybody's ever debunked it. And the other thing that was talked about recently, there was a guy, I want to say it was like 88, 89. This would have been like right during or right after I graduated high school. I graduated in 88. And I remember watching this on TV. Uh, they, uh, they, hard to do this and talk, especially when I'm trying to. There was this guy called Bob Lazar. And he basically came out and said that he worked at Area 51, or specifically, he uh, he claimed that he was working on. And they did an interview with him where hit his ID. He didn't know who he was, and he actually felt his life was in danger. And so then he came forward because he actually thought his life was in danger. And it honestly, and this is my opinion, this isn't a fact. It's a fact that he came forward. It was a award-winning journalist, hard-hitting news journalist, and he has been kind of a UFO reporter for it'd be like close to 30 years now, or a little over 30 years. And he has successfully walked that tightrope where he can report on UFOs and he can still cover regular news. He's still part of the I team in there. And before I forget about the other thing, if you remember the Phoenix Lights thing, or if you've heard of that, the governor that made a big spectacle of that, he basically said, "Well, yeah, we caught him," and he brought somebody in an ET outfit out in handcuffs. He has come out since and said that he was strong armed by the government to cover that up. And he said, "Yeah, that there appeared to be something there, and I went along with the federal government and helped them cover it up." But anyways, Joe Rogan had he's got a bunch of clips on YouTube where he's talking to George Knapp and other guys. And when he did that interview with Bob Lazar back in the late 80s, Bob Lazar talked about a brand new element because he worked on UFOs according to him, and part of what made the UFO work was this element 115. It didn't exist on the periodical chart back then, and he gave a rough idea. Like he didn't just say, "Oh yeah, there's an element, 115." I don't think 115 was the next one that was going to be found. Well, now that he has, like we're talking 30 years later, element 115 has been found. It's been made by a couple different countries. It lasts for a split second. We don't have the ability to make it. And a lot of the characteristics of the element match up with what he told them it was going to be. I mean, he didn't give everything on it, but it's like a lot of what he said is lining up now. And the other thing is, back then when it happened, he was supposed to have worked at the Los Alamos lab. He was supposed to have gone to, I think it was MIT. And he was supposed to do all this. Well, they had scrubbed him, it appears. Like, see, he didn't have a record anymore. The Los Angeles nuclear lab or physics lab, they didn't admit he was there. The school that he had gone to said they didn't have any record of it. And Bob Knapp, from what I remember, he had like what do they call that, your tax forms, your pay stub or something else that he got. It's basically it was something he'd gotten from the personnel files, like either his U2 form for his tax withdrawal, or it was a pay stub. And when the reporter tried to track some of this down, I'm going from memory when it happened. When the reporter tried to track this down, he went to a contact he had in the military, and he said, "Yeah," or the government. He's like, "Yeah, got a guy. He's got a pay stub here, and it's got this area code and this phone number as his contact information." And what happened was they uh, they said, "Yeah, well, I'll look into it and I'll get back to you." And they basically got their ass reamed out because even having it was a big deal. And then the other thing is like, I got to kill this guy. But Los Alamos, they didn't admit that the guy worked there. And but they've done some looking at it, and what they found was, they found newspaper clippings where, because the guy in question, this Bob Lazar, what he did was he took a jet engine and he hooked it up to his Honda Civic, and he drove it to work every day. He literally drove this thing to work. And then years later, I think I got this from Joe Rogan. I didn't know this back in the day, but he basically took like a Corvette, something else like that, and he made it basically run on hydrogen. And it was one that you could drive around on the road, but he literally had a jet engine that hooked up to this thing, and he would drive it to work every day. And in this article, they basically said that, this guy, the jet engine car guy, uh, He worked at the Los Alamos nuclear lab, physics lab. And the other thing that came up is when they did a little digging, they actually found one of the labs. He found one of the lab's phone books, the reporter did, and it had this guy's phone number there. And not only that, before he had been outed, he took the news crew in there with cameras. And he drove around. The security guards and everybody else seemed to know him. He could just basically take guests in there with cameras and film. So it was a little hard for them to do it. But he said, yeah, there were all these people that were willing to talk to us. And then, like, overnight, it's like they're like, yeah, we don't know them. We can't talk to you. But it's like a lot of this has stood up the test of time. But but I've just found it fascinating where now the military is admitting that these things are real. And so it's shown up in my news feed anyways. I can't remember what I looked at, but it brought up a lot of referral stuff in YouTube. But I started watching this. Well, here's the thing. I'm watching that Project Blue Book, and they had one episode in there where it was one of the generals or colonels that was in charge of Blue Book. And they were talking about how somebody had come forward with like an alien autopsy video. And I'm watching this in the show. And like I said, I read up a lot on this before. And it was acting like it was a real thing. Like, oh yeah, we got this alien autopsy video. And I'm just in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, this doesn't make any sense. I thought that thing was a hoax. And well, it might be the same video, that I don't know. But it's not the one that Jonathan Frakes came out with in the 90s or something like that, or like early 2000. That's not the one I'm talking about. It might be the same video, but this is one that was coming out back in the 50s. And what it was is it was one of the guys who had allegedly been strong armed by the military to be silent about the UFO in Roswell. And I'm just watching, I'm like, man, I think they got this wrong because I remember that thing being a fake. I literally remember that thing being a fake. I really do. And then what happened was, as the show went on, they kind of clicked on it, and then my memory started to come back from what I had read. It was a fake. What had happened is one of the nurses who had apparently been there on the base when they were bringing in bodies and stuff like that, uh, they had kind of ruined her career over it to keep her silent. Well, her and some others that were there, because she might have actually been involved in the autopsy, they basically recreated the alien autopsy video. They did it in a studio down there. I think it might be where the news was shot. And they figured out that it was basically shot in the TV studio. But what the interesting part, and this I remembered, and I think Hynek was an advisor, or somebody was an advisor for the Blue Book, because the story I remember, and it came back because I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what's coming back to memory when I was watching the show. When they started showing the alien autopsy, that general, and this is in the TV show, but it checks up with my memory, and it might be faulty, my health issues, I don't know. But it seems to me what I remember reading when it came out, that general flipped out. He actually thought they had the real autopsy because he literally started going into a cold sweat, and they recreated it for the show. The guy's like, he goes, do you know what you've done? Do you know what you've done? I mean, he was just flipping out. He's like, do you know what problems you've got? I mean, he's just a cold sweat flipping out. And then when it was pointed out that, yeah, it was shot in the studio, that clock, those lights all line up with what's in there, it's a fake. Then he sort of regained his composure. And they showed it pretty good in the show that, he was just flipping the fuck out on this. And the one thing I will add to this, and this came out from, and I think it's been reported in the news. They didn't make this up. It's actually been reported in the news. They found a CIA memo. Now, this would be the one that was shown on TV in the late 90s, early 2000s. Jonathan Frakes was the host of the documentary or whatever it is. But it was the alien autopsy video, black and white one that was supposed to be real. There's a memo from somebody in the CIA. The CIA thought that was the real video. They literally thought that was the real video. And they discussed that. And I thought that was pretty interesting too. Um, and then the one thing, and this is basically where I'm going to end it, and I'll probably end the stream because I think I've talked about this enough. It feels good to be back on here again. But no, the thing that I want to point out, and this was a thing that was being talked about, and if I've got the story right, and this is actually coming from like I think military sources. It was somebody that was either involved or knew about it allegedly. But it would be that special acts program that I talked about that Harry Reid had started. Okay, the they the one guy they were talking to said that the reason the program got pulled, they were investigating it. You know, the government had set them up to investigate these phenomena. And some of the stuff that was creeping into their investigations was stuff that they didn't think this is what it was. Um, they didn't think this is what it was, but they said if it ever came out, they were afraid that it would look like the military was investigating the occult, demonic possessions and shit like that. These were the things that they were running into, and they were worried that it would look like they were either dealing in the occult or researching demonic possessions and shit like that. If I got the story right, that's what he was kind of talking about. And so that was one of the reasons why this program got dropped. And then I don't know what caused them to leak it recently. I think I've got that part of it right.